Harlem, 1935. A white gangster stands up in a packed nightclub and humiliates the most dangerous black man in the room. 7 days later, 8 bodies are found. This isn't a rumor. This is how power changed in New York. Harlem, Monday night, September 16, 1935. The Cotton Club was full, not busy, not crowded, full. 200 people packed shoulder to shoulder inside the most dangerous room in the city, white downtown money in tailored suits. Politicians pretending not to recognize gangsters, celebrities pretending not to see the guns, illegal whiskey flowing like it was legal, music loud enough to drown conscience, laughter loud enough to hide fear. This was the Cotton Club, glamour on the surface, violence underneath. Near the back, almost swallowed by shadows, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat alone. No entourage, no noise, just a bourbon in his hand and his eyes fixed on the stage. Bumpy didn't scan the room like nervous men did. He didn't posture, didn't perform. He watched, always watching, counting faces, counting exits, measuring danger. Most people didn't notice him. That was the mistake. Near the stage sat Dutch Schultz, red-faced, sweating, drunk on expensive whiskey and something stronger, contempt. Schultz had been stewing all night, every laugh too loud, every glance toward the back table another insult stacking up in his mind. He stood up suddenly. Chairs scraped, conversation slowed, bodyguards snapped to attention. Schultz didn't walk, he stomped, straight through the club, straight toward Bumpy Johnson. People turned in their seats, not because they recognized danger, but because they recognized certainty. Schultz's body language said something irreversible was coming. He reached the table and slammed his hand down so hard the bourbon glass jumped, spilling amber liquid across the wood. The band faltered, then stopped. Schultz didn't lower his voice, didn't pretend this was business. He wanted witnesses. "You got some nerve showing your face in here tonight, boy." Every head turned. "You think you're somebody?" Schultz sneered. "You think running penny ante policy banks in Negro Town makes you a real gangster?" The word hung in the air, ugly, naked. "I've been trying to be reasonable with you people," Schultz continued, louder now, "trying to give you color rods, a chance to work for me. But you're too stupid to understand when someone's doing you a favor." Silence swallowed the room. 200 people stopped breathing at once. Even in 1935, even in a whites-only club, even in Harlem, this was extreme. Schultz wasn't just threatening territory, he was stripping dignity in public, making sure everyone understood the hierarchy as he saw it. Bumpy Johnson didn't move, didn't stand, didn't reach for the 45 he carried, didn't blink. He looked up at Schultz calmly, no anger, no fear, nothing. That calm unsettled people more than a gun would have. Schultz mistook it for weakness. He leaned closer, enjoying the moment, enjoying the humiliation, enjoying the fact that Harlem's toughest black gangster was sitting quietly while being dressed down like a child. Bumpy waited. When Schultz finally ran out of words, Bumpy spoke, quietly. So quiet people leaned in. "You got 7 days. The simplicity cut through the room. 7 days to get every one of your people out of Harlem." Schultz laughed, loud, genuine, disbelieving. Bumpy continued, his voice flat, cold. "After that, any white man I find running policy in my neighborhood dies. No threats, no insults, just a sentence. You can insult me. That's your choice," Bumpy said. "But choices have consequences." Schultz threw his head back, roaring with laughter. 7 days, he shouted to the room. "You hear this? The boy thinks he can give Dutch Schultz ultimatums." He turned back, smiling cruelly. "In 7 days, Schultz said, you'll be working for me or you'll be dead. Negroes don't win against white men. That's just how the world works." Bumpy didn't reply. He finished his bourbon, slowly, stood up, and walked out. The crowd parted instinctively, like he carried something contagious, something dangerous. Schultz watched him go, still laughing. He believed the matter was settled. 6 hours later, the first body was found, and Harlem began counting days. Dutch Schultz stayed at the Cotton Club another hour. He drank, he laughed, he told the story again and again. Each time, it got better. Each time, Bumpy Johnson got smaller. Schultz played it like a stage act, mocking the calm, imitating the voice, stretching out the words. 7 days. The table roared. His bodyguards laughed on cue. Men leaned in, eager to be part of the moment where power was displayed so openly. To Schultz, this wasn't conflict, it was confirmation. Confirmation that Harlem resistance was finished, that the last serious obstacle had been humiliated in public. That fear still worked exactly the way it always had. When Schultz finally left the club near 2 a.m., he was satisfied, comfortable, certain. Bumpy Johnson, meanwhile, had vanished into the night. Not running, not hiding, thinking. By the time Schultz reached his Bronx headquarters and went to bed, he believed the problem had solved itself. Bumpy had been warned, put in his place, shown the rules. White power, white money, white guns. That was how this ended. At 6:23 a.m. Tuesday morning, a sanitation worker on West 145th Street opened a metal garbage drum. Inside was a body. Vincent Clutch. Mel, one of Schultz's best Harlem collectors. His hands were shattered, his face unrecognizable, his throat cut so deeply it barely held together. Pinned to his shirt was a note, written in block letters. 1 down, 7 to go, leave Harlem. Police arrived within minutes. Veterans took one look and understood this wasn't random, this was organized, intentional. A message. By 8 a.m. the rumor mill was already turning. By 9 a.m. every serious criminal in New York knew. Schultz heard about it over breakfast. At first, he shrugged. Collectors died all the time. Harlem was violent. Coincidence was convenient. Then the note was described. Schultz stopped chewing. 7 to go. That wasn't random. That wasn't coincidence. That was a countdown. Rage followed disbelief. Schultz exploded. Orders flew: find Johnson, kill Johnson, burn Harlem if necessary. Money was offered. Threats were made. But there was a problem Schultz didn't anticipate. Nobody talked. The same people Schultz had insulted, the same community he'd dismissed, the same neighborhood he thought he could bully into submission. They went silent. By noon, Johnson's apartment was empty. His policy banks were closed. His name disappeared from the streets like it had never existed. Schultz had power, but Bumpy had something more dangerous. Harlem's permission. That afternoon, another envelope slid under Schultz's door. Same handwriting, same paper, 1 down, 7 to go. The next one dies today. For the first time in his career, Dutch Schultz felt it. Not anger, not arrogance, fear, and somewhere in the city, Bumpy Johnson was already choosing who died next. Dutch Schultz believed power came from 3 things: money, guns, fear, and in most places he was right. That formula had crushed competitors from the Bronx to Brooklyn. It had bought politicians, silenced witnesses, turned neighborhoods into income streams. Schultz didn't negotiate. He arrived, applied pressure, and waited for people to fold. Harlem was supposed to be the same. That was his first mistake. Harlem didn't run on fear alone. It ran on trust. Policy banks weren't just gambling operations. They were neighborhood institutions. Runners were known faces. Collectors were local. Money stayed circulating inside the community, quietly helping families, paying rent, smoothing problems. Schultz's men were outsiders. White collectors walking into black neighborhoods, taking money, offering nothing back, treating locals with open contempt, beating runners in public, making examples without understanding the cost. Resentment didn't explode, it spread. Schultz mistook silence for submission. His second mistake was visibility. Schultz liked public violence. It fed his reputation. Bodies left where they could be seen. Beatings delivered as warnings. He believed spectacle equaled control. In Harlem, spectacle created enemies. Every man Schultz hurt had a family. Every family had friends. Every friend remembered, quietly, patiently. And then there was the third mistake, the fatal one. Schultz made it personal. Business disputes stay contained. Territory can be negotiated. Even killings can be absorbed. Public humiliation couldn't. By screaming racial slurs at Bumpy Johnson in front of 200 witnesses, Schultz turned a criminal dispute into a moral one. He forced Harlem to choose sides, not between gangsters, but between dignity and submission. And Harlem chose. Bumpy Johnson understood this immediately. As he walked through the streets after leaving the Cotton Club, he didn't think about revenge. He thought about leverage, about timing, about rules. Schultz believed killing him would end the problem. Bumpy knew something Schultz didn't. You don't have to kill the key. To collapse the kingdom, you remove the pillars, the collectors, the enforcers, the men who made money move. 8 names. 8 men who touched every dollar Schultz pulled from Harlem. Men visible enough to be found, important enough to matter. Disposable enough that Schultz assumed they were replaceable. They weren't. Bumpy's response required discipline. No speeches, no claims, no visibility. The absence of noise was part of the weapon. First rule, disappear. If Schultz couldn't find him, he couldn't retaliate effectively. Worse, he'd grow desperate, careless. Second rule, precision. 1 death per day. No randomness, no frenzy. Rhythm mattered. Predictability created dread. Third rule, clarity. Every body needed context. Every death needed explanation. No ambiguity. No confusion about why this was happening. This wasn't chaos. It was instruction. By the time Schultz realized what was happening, it was already too late to stop. Because Harlem wasn't helping him. Not out of fear, out of agreement. Schultz had insulted them all. Bumpy Johnson had simply given that insult a deadline, and as the city woke up on the second day, another man on the list was already being watched, already being followed, already realizing, too late, that working for Dutch Schultz had just become a death sentence. Bumpy Johnson didn't go home to sleep. He went home to work. By the time he reached his apartment on West 139th Street, it was past 1:30 in the morning. The city was quiet in that uneasy way it gets right before dawn, when night hasn't let go, but morning hasn't arrived to protect anyone yet. Within minutes, men began arriving. Not many, only the ones that mattered. These weren't loud men. They didn't ask questions. They didn't posture. Each of them had proven something over years: discipline, loyalty, silence, the kind of men who didn't talk even when talking. Might save them. Bumpy laid out 8 names. No speeches, no emotion, just facts. These men die in 7 days, he said calmly. 1 per day, in order. He explained the rules. Kill them however you want, but make it clear why. Make sure the bodies are found quickly. Make sure the notes are seen. This wasn't about speed, it was about certainty. The first name on the list was Vincent Mell, a collector, reliable, confident, finished his routes late, traveled alone when he thought he was safe. Bumpy knew his habits, knew his routes, knew where he disappeared after midnight. Tomorrow night, Bumpy said. After his last pickup, one of the men hesitated. Just for a moment. Bump, he said carefully. If we do this, Schultz won't stop. He'll come for you, for all of us. Bumpy smiled, not warmly, not proudly, patiently. Schultz can't kill what he can't find, he said. Starting today, I'm gone. He explained the final piece. Schultz would look everywhere, offer money, threaten people, tear Harlem apart trying to find him, and Harlem would protect him, because everyone had seen what Schultz did at the Cotton Club. Everyone had heard the words. Everyone understood this wasn't just about gambling anymore. This was about respect. Schultz thought fear ruled Harlem. Bumpy knew memory did. Harlem won't help him, Bumpy said quietly. Not after what he said. Not after how he said it. By 5:30 a.m., the plan was complete. Surveillance routes assigned, safe locations prepared, weapons gathered quietly. No unnecessary movement, no loose ends. At 6 a.m., as the sun began pushing pale light between buildings, Bumpy Johnson walked out carrying a small suitcase. He got into a waiting car and disappeared. For the next 7 days, Dutch Schultz would look for him everywhere and find him nowhere. At 6:23 a.m., less than 5 hours later, Vincent Mell. Body was discovered. The countdown had begun, for Schultz had laughed at the ultimatum. Dr. Now the city was counting bodies, and somewhere in Harlem, 7 men were waking up to a week they would not survive. By the second morning, Dutch Schultz wasn't laughing anymore, bar he hadn't slept. The phone on his desk rang nonstop. Collectors checking in, lieutenants asking for instructions, enforcers demanding targets. Every call carried the same unspoken question. Is this real? Schultz answered none of them directly. Instead, he raged. He doubled guards. He moved money. He ordered men to travel in pairs, then in threes. He promised bonuses, threatened punishment, swore vengeance on anyone who showed weakness. But fear doesn't respond to orders. It responds to patterns. At 9:11 p.m., that night, Leon Carter, another Schultz collector, stepped out of a bar near Lenox Avenue. He'd ignored the warnings, told friends he wasn't scared, told a woman he'd walk her home after one more drink. He never made it to the sidewalk. A single shot, clean, controlled. No witnesses. By 9:24 p.m., police found the body. Another note, 2 down, 6 to go. Leave Harlem. This time, there was no disbelief. The whispers started immediately. Bars lowered their music. Runners closed early. Streets emptied faster than usual. Schultz's name, once spoken with confidence, now carried hesitation. People began doing math. Br 1 body per day. Br always found. Br always explained. Br that wasn't chaos. Br that was control. Schultz felt it slipping. Br's men stopped moving freely. Routes changed every hour. Meetings were canceled. The machine that printed money began stalling, not because it was attacked directly, but because the men running it no longer trusted tomorrow. By midnight, Schultz had issued a new order. No one works Harlem alone, no exceptions. It sounded smart, it was a mistake. By groups draw. Attention. Attention creates witnesses. Witnesses create rumors. And rumors were Harlem's currency. Every time Schultz's men appeared in clusters, windows closed. Conversations stopped. Faces turned away, not in fear, but in judgment. They were marked now. That night, Schultz finally asked the question he should have asked days earlier. Where the hell is Bumpy Johnson? No one answered, not because they didn't know, because they didn't want to. By dawn, the city understood something Schultz didn't yet accept. This wasn't about killing 8 men. It was about proving that Schultz couldn't protect his own, and protection was the only thing he sold. As morning broke on day 3, another name was circled, another route memorized. Another man realized, too late, that being loyal to Dutch Schultz was no longer bravery, it was a liability. And somewhere unseen and untouched, Bumpy Johnson waited patiently, while Harlem did exactly what he knew it would do. Nothing. Day 3 broke Dutch Schultz, not publicly, not yet. But inside something cracked. He had lost 2 men in 48 hours, not in gunfights, not in territory wars, quietly, cleanly, like clockwork. That terrified him, because chaos could be crushed. Order couldn't. Schultz responded the only way he knew how. He escalated. That morning he ordered his enforcers into Harlem in force. Dozens of them, armed, visible, aggressive. They kicked in doors, flipped policy banks, dragged runners into the street, broke bones in front of neighbors. He wanted information. What he got was resistance, not violent resistance, something worse, refusal. People stared through him. Women pulled children inside. Old men shook their heads. No one screamed. No one begged. No one helped. Harlem absorbed the violence like stone. By noon, Schultz had created exactly what Bumpy wanted. Unity, the brutal. He reminded everyone of the Cotton Club, of the insult, of the line Schultz crossed. And now it wasn't just Bumpy's problem. It was personal for thousands. At 7:42 p.m. that night, Samuel Red Haskins, Schultz's third man on the list, left a tenement on 131st Street. He was shaken. He'd spent the day moving locations, sleeping on couches, checking shadows. He thought he was ahead of it. He wasn't. 2 men approached from opposite directions. No words, no hesitation. 3 shots. Close, precise. By 7:55 p.m., police found the body. The note was shorter this time. 3 down, 5 to go. You can't stop this. That sentence hit Schultz harder than the deaths. You can't stop this, because it was true. Every move he made created another opening. Every show of force turned more people against him. Every hour that passed proved Bumpy Johnson understood the city better than he ever would. That night, Schultz did something unheard of. He called a meeting with Italian bosses, not as a threat, as a request. He wanted mediation, protection, backup. The response was cold. This was his mess. He had disrespected a powerful black operator publicly. He had destabilized Harlem. He had drawn police attention. No one wanted in. Schultz was alone. By midnight, his headquarters felt different, quieter, tighter. Men avoided eye contact. Guards flinched at shadows. They were realizing something Schultz refused to say out loud. If Bumpy Johnson could do this to Dutch Schultz, he could do it to anyone. As day 4 approached, Schultz sat staring at the list. 5 names left, 5 days left, and for the first time since he'd risen to power, Dutch Schultz wasn't planning his next move. He was waiting to see who died next. By day 4, Dutch Schultz had stopped pretending this was manageable. He fortified. Armored cars replaced sedans. Guards slept in ifts. Routes were abandoned mid-drive if anything felt wrong. The men still alive on the list were no longer collectors. They were prisoners under protection. One of them was Eddie Knuckles Romano. Romano wasn't just a collector. He was a bodyguard, a man Schultz trusted with his life. Thick-necked, heavy-handed, convinced violence could solve anything if applied fast enough. Romano made one fatal assumption, that protection meant immunity. That afternoon he holed up in a brownstone near 116th Street with 3 armed guards, windows covered, doors locked, weapons laid out on tables like reassurance. Romano laughed. "Let Johnson try," he said. "I'd like to see him." That confidence lasted until sunset. At 6:18 p.m. a fire alarm pulled half the block into the street. Smoke poured from a basement apartment 2 doors down. Neighbors screamed, people ran, police sirens wailed in the distance. Romano's guards rushed to the windows. That was the mistake. A delivery truck idled at the corner, something that had been there all afternoon unnoticed. 2 men stepped out calmly, blending with the panic. They didn't rush, they didn't look around. They knew exactly where to go. By the time the guards realized what was happening, it was already over. Romano was found in the stairwell. 1 shot to the head, no struggle, no chaos. Pinned to his jacket was the note: 4 down, 4 to go. Hiding doesn't save you. This death hit harder than the others, because Romano wasn't exposed. He was protected. If he could be reached, no one was safe. Schultz exploded. He fired men on the spot, smashed furniture, threatened everyone within reach, demanded to know how Bumpy Johnson was still operating without being seen. No one answered, because by now the answer was obvious. He wasn't operating despite being unseen. He was operating because he was unseen. Harlem W. is doing the work. Every movement reported, every stranger noted, every safe house quietly marked. Information flowed not through fear, but through memory and loyalty. By midnight, the remaining 4 men begged Schultz to pull them out of Harlem entirely. Schultz refused. Leaving would look weak. That more than anything sealed their fate. Because Bumpy Johnson didn't need all 8 deaths. He needed the message completed, and as day 5 began, the city already knew. The countdown wasn't slowing, it was accelerating, and Dutch Schultz, once the most feared man in New York, was now trapped inside his own reputation, watching the walls close in, 1 body at a time. Day 5 was the first time Dutch Schultz tried to negotiate, not publicly, not proudly, quietly. At 10:40 a.m., a trusted intermediary was sent uptown, an old fixer with no colors, no allegiance, and a reputation for surviving other men's wars. His instructions were simple: find Bumpy Johnson, offer terms, money, territory, apology, if necessary, anything to stop the clock. By noon, the fixer came back empty-handed, not rejected, ignored. That silence was louder than gunfire. It told Schultz something he couldn't accept. This was no longer a business dispute. This was a verdict. That night's target was Charles Lucky Moore, younger than the others, nervous, not built for pressure. By day 5, he was unraveling, jumping at sounds, changing locations hourly, calling Schultz every 30 minutes for reassurance. Schultz gave him guards, cars, promises. None of it mattered. At 8:03 p.m., Moore exited a movie theater on 125th Street, surrounded by 2 bodyguards. Crowds everywhere, noise, light, safety, or so it felt. The shot came from behind. 1, clean. The crowd scattered in screams. Guards drew weapons too late. Moore collapsed on the sidewalk, eyes wide, understanding arriving Seiko. NDS before death. The note was already there. 5 down, 3 to go. Time's almost up. This one broke the illusion completely. Public place, crowds, guards. Bumpy wasn't avoiding attention anymore. He was proving a point. Schultz couldn't protect anyone, anywhere. Phones rang non-stop that night. Associates pulled out. Investors froze money. Rivals began circling, smelling weakness for the first time in years. Schultz sat alone in his office, staring at the list. 3 names left, 3 days. He finally understood the truth. Even if the killing stopped tomorrow, he was finished. Fear had left him, and fear was all he ever had. Somewhere in the city, Bumpy Johnson checked the clock. The deal window was closed. Now came the ending. By day 6, the mood in Harlem had changed completely. The city that once whispered about Schultz's power now murmured in fear of Bumpy Johnson. Shadows moved differently. Doors closed faster. Footsteps echoed longer. Every alley, every corner carried the sense that someone was watching, calculating, waiting. Dutch Schultz, once the king of Harlem's underground, was now desperate. He ordered extra guards, twice the patrols, bribed informants, sent runners to every speakeasy and policy bank, threatened anyone who even looked like they knew something. But the network of Bumpy Johnson was invisible, untraceable, and perfectly patient. The 6th target, Peter Two Fingers. Malone. Malone had earned his nickname in a gambling accident, a subtle reminder that no one in Schultz's circle was invincible. Malone had been hiding since the first two killings, changing addresses, traveling in disguise. At 11:17 p.m., Malone stepped out of a Harlem brownstone, a messenger bag slung across his shoulder. He didn't notice the figure stepping from the shadows. One shot, no scream, just a body crumpling silently into the darkness. Pinned to his coat, the familiar block letter note, 6 down, 2 to go. Harlem protects its own. The message was clear. Bumpy Johnson wasn't bluffing. Schultz's panic was palpable. He realized his men were no longer just targets. They were bait. Anyone still working for him was expendable. Each death reinforced the same lesson. Harlem belonged to Johnson. Across Harlem, whispers spread like wildfire. Policy runners, shopkeepers, bartenders, they all knew the pattern. They knew who was safe and who was not. And they knew who they could trust. Bumpy Johnson's genius was in the psychology of terror. He didn't just kill, he controlled perception. 8 men, 7 days. But each act carried a lesson for the entire criminal underworld. Meanwhile, Schultz's remaining operators began quarreling among themselves, unsure who would survive, unsure if anyone could stop this unseen killer. Fear and suspicion were now killing the organization from within faster than Bumpy's men could strike. Harlem streets were quiet, too quiet. Shadows moved differently. Windows stayed shuttered. Doors stayed locked. And somewhere, in a safe house no one knew about, Bumpy Johnson watched it all unfold. He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. He simply checked the clock, reviewed his list, and prepared for the final 2 strikes. The city knew the story. The criminal world knew the story. And Dutch Schultz, once untouchable, was learning the cost disrespecting a black gangster who understood Harlem like no one else ever could. Day 6 ended not with fireworks, not with chaos, but with a chilling quiet, the calm before the storm that would finally decide Schultz's fate. The 7th day arrived. Harlem held its breath. Bumpy Johnson's plan had been flawless. 6 men had already fallen in meticulously orchestrated executions. Each death had sent shockwaves, each note a chilling reminder of what happened when respect was denied. The final 2 targets were the most dangerous: Patrick "Pat" the Fox O'Brien, Schultz's strategist, and Harold "Bunny" Weinstein, the enforcer who had coordinated Schultz's Harlem operations. Schultz, meanwhile, had descended into near madness. His remaining men refused to leave their safe houses. Rumors swirled that Bumpy himself was haunting the streets, that every shadow could be a gunman. Schultz sent threats, bribes, even his top lieutenants into Harlem, but no one could locate Johnson. Saturday night, 8:47 p.m., a woman approached O'Brien's Bronx safe house, claiming a simple mistake, a wrong apartment. But inside, chaos erupted instantly. A gasoline bomb ignited the apartment, flames shooting toward the ceiling. Guards ran, but men waiting in the alley were ready. Shotguns cracked. O'Brien tried to escape, but he was cut down before he could reach the fire escape, his body falling back into the inferno. Pinned to his charred coat, a partially burned but legible note. 8 down, 0 to go. Harlem belongs to Harlem. Never disrespect black brothers. By Sunday morning, Schultz had lost everything in Harlem. All 18 months of investment, manpower, and territory vanished. 8 of his top operators were dead, each killed in a way that was public, precise, and symbolic. Every note left behind carried the same lesson: disrespect carries a fatal price. Word spread quickly through New York's underworld. The story wasn't just about killings, it was about principle, power, and respect. Bumpy Johnson had won not just the battle, but the war, and he had established a precedent for how black gangsters would be treated in the city for decades. Monday morning, September 23rd, Schultz received his final message: 8 dead men. A clear ultimatum: withdraw from Harlem or continue losing lives, 1 per day. Schultz understood now that he wasn't negotiating with a man. He was negotiating with Harlem itself. He had been publicly humiliated at the Cotton Club, had laughed at Johnson's threats, and paid with blood. By the end of that week, Schultz pulled his men from Harlem completely, abandoning months of work, substantial sums of money, and the illusion of control. The streets whispered a new order: Harlem protects its own. Bumpy Johnson emerged from hiding Tuesday, September 24th, walking confidently down Lenox Avenue. When asked about the killings, he simply said, "I don't know what you're talking about. Harlem protects its own. Disrespect black brothers and you pay the price." The lesson endured. White gangsters, even decades later, learned caution. Disrespect, racial slurs, or underestimation of black operators would carry deadly consequences. In 1 week, Bumpy Johnson had transformed Harlem's underworld. 8 bodies in 7 days weren't just revenge. They were a message etched in blood, a principle of respect that would govern criminal interactions in New York for generations. Dutch Schultz never returned. 1 month later, he was killed in Newark by other gangsters, leaving Harlem's empire to Bumpy Johnson, who would build it into a legendary empire. 8 bodies. 7 days. One lesson: never disrespect black brothers. Harlem had spoken, and the city listened. The week of terror had ended, but the echoes of Bumpy Johnson's actions reverbera through New York City and beyond. Harlem had spoken louder than guns, money, or politics ever could. The brutal precision of the executions, paired with the public humiliation of Dutch Schultz, had sent a message to the entire underworld. Black gangsters were not to be underestimated, disrespected, or marginalized. For Schultz, the cost was total. He had lost all Harlem operations, 8 loyal men, and his own credibility. Any remaining allies within the city understood that his authority was compromised. White gangsters who had once scoffed at black operators now approached Harlem with caution, respect, and fear. Bumpy Johnson, on the other hand, had cemented his reputation as Harlem's undisputed kingpin. But his victory wasn't just about territory or profit, it was about principle. He had demonstrated that intelligence, patience, and strategic planning could defeat brute force, even from the most powerful white gangs in New York. By systematically eliminating Schultz's key operators while remaining unseen, Johnson had turned the tables without a frontal assault. The public and the press barely understood the intricacies of what had happened. Newspapers focused on the mysterious killings of Schultz's men, speculating on mob wars, revenge, and turf disputes. Harlem insiders, however, knew exactly what the killings meant. Respect in this city had a price, and Bumpy Johnson had set it. The psychological impact on the underworld was profound. White gangsters became careful with their words, understanding that slights, racial insults, or public humiliation could have deadly consequences. Meanwhile, black operators learned the value of discipline, secrecy, and strategic retaliation. The events of September 1935 weren't just about one gangster's revenge, they were a shift in power dynamics that would endure for decades. By October, Bumpy had taken over Schultz's former operations and expanded them beyond what Schultz had imagined. His methods were calculated and precise, leveraging community loyalty, strategic partnerships, and an unflinching adherence to the principle he had just proven: Harlem protects its own. In the years that followed, Bumpy Johnson became a legendary figure, both feared and respected. He would continue to influence Harlem's criminal landscape for decades, and his story would be told and retold as a lesson in strategy, respect, and the consequences of underestimating one's opponents. Meanwhile, Dutch Schultz's downfall was equally dramatic. The humiliation at the Cotton Club, followed by the systematic loss of his men, left him isolated, paranoid, and vulnerable. 1 month later, he was murdered in Newark, eliminating a dangerous player from the New York underworld entirely. Johnson's victory had reshaped the city's criminal hierarchy permanently. The legacy of the 8 bodies in 7 days wasn't just about revenge or power, it was about teaching an immutable lesson. Harlem had established a principle that transcended territory and profit: disrespect black brothers, and you pay with blood. The message was clear, precise, and unforgettable, ensuring that future generations of gangsters, white and black, would remember the cost of disrespect in the streets of Harlem. Bumpy Johnson had not only defended his own life and operations, he had redefined power, respect, and strategy in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in America. The story of Dutch Schultz and the 8 dead men would echo for a century, a chilling reminder that intelligence, patience, and principle often outmatch sheer force. Harlem had survived, Harlem had won, and Harlem's protector, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, had become a legend that would never fade. Harlem, September 1935. 8 bodies, 7 days, 1 man, and a lesson that no gangster, white or black, would ever forget. Imagine the streets, still slick from a late summer rain, echoing with the quiet whispers of a city that had just witnessed history being rewritten in blood. Dutch Schultz had laughed at Bumpy Johnson in the Cotton Club, thinking the insult trivial, thinking his power unshakable. By the end of that week, his empire in Harlem was obliterated, his men dead, and his reputation shattered. All because he underestimated one man's patience, intelligence, and will. Bumpy Johnson hadn't just won a turf war, He had changed the rules of the game forever. The message was simple, chilling, and unforgettable. Disrespect is lethal. Authority must be recognized. Harlem protects its own. Picture Johnson walking back onto Lenox Avenue after his week in hiding. Calm, collected, unseen for 7 days. Every step measured. Every glance deliberate. People stared, unsure if this man who had orchestrated 8 executions single-handedly was a ghost, a myth, or something far more dangerous. And when reporters asked him about the killings, his answer was cold, precise, and terrifyingly simple. Harlem protects its own. Anybody who disrespects our people learns that choices have consequences. That statement wasn't just a warning. It was a principle that would echo through the streets of New York for decades. White gangsters approached Harlem differently. Black operators learned strategy, patience, and precision. And Bumpy Johnson? He became a legend, not just for surviving the most powerful mobster in New York, but for turning humiliation into victory, violence into strategy, and respect into power. Every alley, every policy bank, every whispered conversation in Harlem carried the invisible weight of those 8 bodies. Every gangster knew, one misstep, one insult, one failure to recognize authority, and you could end up like Vincent Mell, Tommy Brennan, or Joseph Catalano. Johnson had shown the world that power wasn't just about guns or money. It was about control, intelligence, and the ability to enforce respect. Even Schultz, months later in Newark, paid the ultimate price for underestimating him. Dead before he could recover, his ambition crushed. Harlem, under Johnson's watch, had become untouchable. And the principle was clear. Respect flows both ways, and anyone who forgets that dies. Now imagine watching this story unfold. The tension, the terror, the slow, methodical dismantling of a mob empire by one man who refused to bow, who refused to be humiliated, who refused to be anyone's lesser. That's the kind of story that grabs you, holds you, and refuses to let go. Every word, every moment, every heartbeat matters. Because in Bumpy Johnson's Harlem, every action has a consequence. And every choice can be the difference between life and death. 8 men, 7 days, one lesson. Never disrespect black brothers. Never underestimate Harlem. And never forget the man who turned insult into history. The streets remember. The city remembers. The underworld remembers. And you? Now you do too.